the sound that ended an empire. Remember to subscribe to our channel, like this video, and leave your comments below for more stories like this. The sound that made the silence in courtroom 4B of the New York City District Court so absolute, you could hear the fluorescent lights humming. Wasn't the judge's gavel or the rustle of papers. It was the soft, decadent pop of a cork. Richard Sterling, a man sculpted by arrogance and the fine wool of his custom suit, stood up with a triumphant smirk, his arms around a woman who was decidedly not his wife. With a grace befitting a king, he uncorked a bottle of cava and poured 2 flutes, his mistress, Sophia Marin, giggling beside him. He was there to finalize his divorce, to cast off his wife of 20 years as if she were a nuisance. But Richard never got to taste his cava, because what happened next wasn't a settlement. It was an annihilation. Richard Sterling didn't walk into a room. He conquered it. On that Thursday morning, he entered the quiet, wood-paneled halls of the courthouse as if he were stepping onto the deck of his yacht in the Hamptons. He was a monument to his own success, from the polished gleam of his Louboutin shoes to the self-assured set of his jaw. His suit, the color of an approaching storm, was in stark contrast to the almost offensively cheerful disposition he wore like a medal. On his arm was Sophia Marin, 28 years old, 2 decades younger than the woman she was helping to replace. Sophia was all sharp angles and modern beauty, a living testament to Richard's virility and wealth. Her dress was a fine crimson silk that clung to a figure sculpted by personal trainers and a carefree lifestyle. She looked at Richard with the kind of wide-eyed adoration that only a man with a 9-figure net worth could inspire. To the reporters and legal assistants who whispered in the hallway, they weren't just a couple. They were a statement, a spectacular announcement of a midlife crisis so epic it deserved its own television series. But the true spectacle, the act of arrogance that would be talked about for years, was what his assistant carried, a silver ice bucket from which the neck of a cava bottle protruded. It was an act of theatrical contempt so profound it stole the air from the hallway. They weren't there for a legal proceeding. They were there for a coronation. Richard was celebrating the final nail in the coffin of his marriage. Across the room, almost invisible in her quiet dignity, sat Eleanor Vance. At 49, she was not the withered, broken woman everyone expected to see. There was no sign of the hysterical wife, no hint of the jilted victim. She wore a simple navy dress, her blonde hair with flecks of silver pulled into a neat bun. Her hands, unadorned except for the wedding band she had not yet removed, were folded calmly in her lap. She sat next to her attorney, Evelyn Miller, a woman whose quiet demeanor masked a mind as sharp as a steel trap. Eleanor saw Richard's entrance not with tears, but with a strange and unnerving serenity. She saw the cava. She saw Sophia's triumphant smile, and she felt a wave not of hurt, but of pity. He still didn't understand. After all this time, after everything she had done, everything they had built, he still saw her as nothing more than a domestic accessory he was now discarding. The courtroom filled. Richard and Sophia took their seats at the plaintiff's table. His lawyer, a burly, equally smug man named Charles Evans, arranging his files with a flourish. Evans gave a polite, condescending nod to Evelyn Miller. He saw this as an open and shut case, a high net worth divorce where the non-earning spouse got a generous but strictly limited buyout. He had handled dozens of them. The men always won. The voice of the bailiff boomed. "All rise!" Judge Helen Parker walked in. She was a woman in her late 60s with a reputation for not suffering fools. Her piercing eyes scanned the room, stopping for a fraction of a second on the cava bucket at Richard's feet. A flash of something unreadable. Annoyance? Amusement? crossed her face before she sat on the bench, her expression becoming a stony mask of judicial authority. "You may be seated," she commanded. Richard leaned into Sophia and whispered, his voice just loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "Get ready to toast your new life, my love." He winked. Eleanor closed her eyes for a single, long second. She wasn't praying. She was remembering. Remembering the beginning, before the marble and glass towers, before the contempt and the kava. She was remembering a small apartment that always smelled of paint thinner and ambition, and the man who had once promised her the world, never imagining that one day she would be the legal owner of it. The king and his queen 25 years ago, Richard Sterling was not an industry titan. He was a man with boundless energy, a charming smile, and holes in his socks. He was a contractor with a pickup truck and a dream, struggling to get his small construction company off the ground. He met Eleanor Vance in a local hardware store. She was no socialite. She was an architectural history student with a passion for design and a sharp eye for potential. He was buying drywall. She was sketching the buttresses of an old building across the street. He fell instantly for her quiet intelligence and the way she saw the world, not just as it was, but as it could be. Their courtship was a whirlwind of late-night conversations, fueled by cheap coffee over blueprints on their small kitchen table. He had the brawn and the salesmanship. She had the vision. "People don't just buy a house, Richard," she told him one night, tapping a pencil on a blueprint. "They buy a feeling. They buy a story of the life they want to live." It was Eleanor who convinced him to stop building cookie-cutter houses and start creating homes. It was Eleanor who, using her grandmother's inheritance, a modest but crucial sum of $50,000, provided the seed capital for them to buy their first dilapidated Victorian home in a neighborhood no one wanted. Richard saw a wreck. Eleanor saw good bones and a future. While he managed the construction crews, she managed the soul of the project. She spent weeks researching the home's original history, hunting for period-appropriate fixtures, designing a floor plan that was functionally modern yet historically respectful. She wasn't just decorating. She was creating the very product he was selling. When it was finished, it sold in a single day for triple their investment. Their company was born. Sterling Properties, Richard wanted to call it. "No," Eleanor had said firmly, a rare moment of assertiveness in those early days. "It should be Sterling and Vance Properties. We are partners in this, your name and my name together." Richard, still deeply in love and recognizing the truth in her words, had willingly agreed. The name was filed, and the partnership was legally formed, with both of them listed as founding partners. That crucial detail, signed on a document in a city hall office, was a promise etched in ink. The next 10 years were a whirlwind of success. Sterling and Vance Properties became the premier name in luxury restorations and high-end developments. Eleanor's design philosophy, a blend of classic elegance and comfortable living, became their signature. She was the silent force behind the brand. While Richard was the face, the one in magazines shaking hands with mayors and financiers, Eleanor was the one staging the properties, picking the art, and hosting the intimate dinners where hesitant investors were persuaded to sign million-dollar checks. She cultivated the relationships that Richard then leveraged for business. She ran his social life with the same meticulous care she used to design a living room, understanding that in their world, perception was currency. But success changed Richard. The man who once valued her vision began to belittle it. Her work became her little hobbies. The investor dinners she orchestrated were just parties. The $50,000 seed capital from her family was forgotten, rewritten in his mind as a small loan he had dwarfed with his own genius. He began to believe his own press. He was not part of a team. He was a solo artist, a king, and Eleanor was simply a part of his court. The first affair was with an architect 10 years his junior. Eleanor found out through a carelessly left hotel receipt in a suit pocket. When she confronted him, her heart in pieces, he didn't deny it. He apologized, not for the betrayal, but for getting caught. He called it a stupid mistake, a meaningless flirtation, brought on by stress. He promised it would never happen again. Eleanor, still believing in the man she had married and the life they had built, chose to forgive him. By then, they had 2 children, a boy and a girl, and she wanted to preserve her family. But something essential had broken. The trust that had been the foundation of their partnership, both personal and professional, was gone. A few years later, a different kind of threat emerged. A rival developer launched a frivolous but potentially damaging lawsuit against Sterling and Vance Properties. Their then attorney, a nervous old man named Robles, panicked. He advised Richard that in order to shield his core assets from a potential judgment, he should transfer his majority ownership stake in the company to Eleanor. Her name wasn't on the construction permits. Her public profile was purely social. "She's clean," Robles had argued. "It's a temporary measure. We'll put everything in her name, a simple asset assignment. Once this blows over, she signs it back. It's foolproof." Richard loved the idea. It felt clever. He presented it to Eleanor as a brilliant legal strategy to protect their family's legacy. He made her feel like his trusted confidant, his partner in this clandestine maneuver. "I need you, Ella," he had said, his voice full of the same sincere charm he had used in his hardware store days. "You're the only one I can trust to hold this for me." Eleanor, wanting to believe he still saw her as his partner, agreed. She went to the lawyer's office alone. Richard was too busy closing a deal in Miami, and she signed the document. The post-nuptial asset assignment agreement. It felt cold and clinical. She signed where the lawyer told her, her mind on protecting her children's future. She never received a final executed copy. Richard told her it was filed, a formality that was already handled. The lawsuit eventually fizzled out, and life moved on. Richard never asked Eleanor to sign the assets back to him. He never mentioned the agreement again. Why would he? In his mind, it was all his anyway. The piece of paper was a formality. He was the king, and she was just the keeper of the vault. He forgot about the document, just as he had forgotten about her initial investment, her design genius, and her name etched alongside his on the company's founding papers. He forgot that a promise once written in law takes on a life of its own. And in his forgetting, he had handed her the keys to the entire kingdom. The verdict back into the present, the courtroom buzzed with anticipation. Judge Parker adjusted her glasses and looked down at the 2 tables. "Mr. Evans, you may begin." Charles Evans stood up, a stocky man in his 50s. He clasped his hands behind his back and walked slowly before the judge. He began in a smooth, practiced voice. "This is, in essence, a simple matter. We are here today to dissolve the marriage of Richard and Eleanor Sterling. While this is always a sad occasion, my client, Mr. Sterling, is prepared to be more than fair. He is a man who honors his commitments." He paused, letting the irony of his statement hang in the air, though he himself did not realize it. Mr. Sterling built a real estate empire, Sterling and Vance Properties, from the ground up, through his own sweat, his own genius, and his own considerable risk. Mrs. Sterling, for her part, was a devoted wife and an excellent mother. She created a comfortable home and supported him socially, as was her role. For this, Mr. Sterling is deeply grateful. Eleanor sat motionless, her expression unreadable. Beside her, Evelyn Miller made a small note on a legal pad. Evans continued, his voice swelling with magnanimity. Therefore, my client is offering a settlement that can only be described as exceptionally generous. A one-time payment of $10 million, the deed to the family estate in Coyoacan, fully paid, and a $50,000 per month spousal support payment for the next 10 years. Your Honor, this is a package that will allow Mrs. Sterling to continue living in extreme comfort for the rest of her life without having to work a single day. He turned slightly to look at Eleanor's table, a condescending smile on his lips. It is a generous offer, a final gift in recognition of their years together. We believe it is more than equitable, and we hope the court will see it that way, allowing us to conclude this matter swiftly. He sat down, an expression of immense satisfaction on his face. Richard leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs and giving Sophia's hand a confident squeeze. $10 million to him was a rounding error. The cost of a nuisance, a small price to pay for his freedom, and for the entirety of the billion-dollar empire he considered his alone. Judge Parker looked down at Eleanor's table. Ms. Miller, Evelyn Miller stood. She was the physical opposite of Charles Evans. Where he was broad and loud, she was slender and serene. She didn't pace. She stood perfectly still, her presence commanding the room through her sheer concentration. $10 million, Your Honor, Evelyn began, her voice clear and precise. We thank Mr. Evans for his performance. However, we are not here today to negotiate Mrs. Sterling's settlement. A murmur ran through the gallery. Evans's smile tightened. Mr. Evans paints a picture of a benevolent king bestowing riches on a loyal subject. This picture is a fantasy, Evelyn continued. It is a narrative constructed to erase my client's fundamental role not only in the marriage, but in the very creation and ownership of the assets in question. We are not here to divide marital property, Your Honor. We are here to confirm legal ownership. The murmur grew louder. Richard uncrossed his legs. A flicker of irritation crossed his face. What was this nonsense? My client, Eleanor Vance, is not seeking a gift from her husband, Evelyn said, her voice dropping slightly, drawing everyone in. She is not the non-earning spouse Mr. Evans so dismissively described. The evidence will show that Mrs. Vance was the founding partner of Sterling and Vance Properties. Her financial investment was the seed from which it grew. Her creative vision was the product it sold. And most importantly, as we will prove with legally binding and fully executed documents, she is and has been for several years the majority and controlling owner of the entire corporate structure of Sterling and Vance. The courtroom fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Charles Evans leaped to his feet. Objection! Your Honor, this is absurd. It is a desperate and fantastical claim. Richard stared at Evelyn Miller as if she had just begun speaking in tongues. He let out a short, sharp laugh of disbelief. Controlling owner? Is she insane? He muttered to Sophia, who was now looking from Richard to Eleanor with a growing sense of confusion. Judge Parker held up a hand. Mr. Evans, sit down. Your objection is noted, but this is an opening statement, not a testimony. She looked back at Evelyn. Ms. Miller, you are making an extraordinary claim. I trust you have more than just rhetoric to back it up. Evelyn Miller nodded, a small, confident smile on her face. Yes, Your Honor. We have documents. We have witnesses. And we have the truth. Mr. Sterling, in his arrogance, appears to have forgotten the fine print of his own history. We are merely here today to remind him. She sat down. Eleanor looked straight ahead, her gaze meeting Richard's across the room. For the first time that day, the smug confidence in his eyes was replaced by a sliver of something else, a small fissure in the marble facade. It was a look of confusion mixed with an incipient rage. He had come for a victory lap, but his opponent hadn't even bothered to show up for the same race. She was running an entirely different one, and he had the nauseating feeling that she was already at the finish line. The paper trail of arrogance. "Ms. Miller, you may call your first witness," Judge Parker said, her voice cutting through the tension of the opening statements. "The plaintiff has no witnesses, Your Honor," Evelyn replied calmly. "We believe the evidence speaks for itself. We would like to begin by submitting our first piece of evidence, Exhibit A." An assistant placed the document folder on the clerk's desk, who then handed it to the judge. Copies were distributed to Judge Parker and a bewildered Charles Evans. "This document, Your Honor," Evelyn explained, "is a certified copy of the original Articles of Incorporation for a company called Sterling and Vance Properties, Inc., filed with the Secretary of State 24 years ago." Richard squinted at the document that Evans slid to him. He remembered the name, of course. It was a sentimental choice from a past life. It didn't mean anything. "As the court can see," Evelyn continued, "there are two founding partners listed with equal shares, Richard Sterling and Eleanor Vance. Not Eleanor Sterling, the wife, but Eleanor Vance, the person, her maiden name." Evans stood up, shaking his head. "Your Honor, this is a historical document. It reflects the state of the company 2 decades ago. It means nothing now. Sterling and Vance Properties has undergone numerous restructurings, mergers, and the creation of a dozen subsidiaries and a primary holding company. This ancient artifact has no bearing on the current corporate structure." Evelyn waited for him to finish. "On the contrary, Your Honor, the foundation is everything. This document establishes from day one that this was not Mr. Sterling's solo venture. It was a partnership. But Mr. Evans is correct that this is only the beginning of the story. Let's turn to the initial capital that funded this partnership." She turned her attention to Richard. "Mr. Sterling, in your deposition, you claimed you started your company with your own savings and small loan from your father. Is that correct?" Richard leaned forward, speaking into the microphone. "That's right, 100%. I built it alone. Are you certain you received no significant financial assistance from anyone else, specifically from Eleanor or her family?" "Absolutely not," Richard said with a dismissive wave. "Her family didn't have that kind of money. It was me. All me." "I see," Evelyn said softly. "Then perhaps you can explain Exhibit B." Another document was shown. This one was older, the paper yellowed with age. It was a handwritten letter. "This," Evelyn announced, "is a letter from Eleanor's late father, David Vance, to his bank, dated April 12, 1999. We have authenticated the signature. In it, he authorizes a cashier's check to be issued from his retirement account in the amount of $50,000. Evans stood up again. "Objection! Hearsay and irrelevant. A letter from a deceased man to his bank doesn't prove anything about where that money went." "Patience, Mr. Evans," Judge Parker warned, her eyes fixed on the document. "The letter goes on to say, and I quote," Evelyn read, "This check is to be made out to both Richard Sterling and Eleanor Vance to serve as the initial capital investment for their new joint business venture." "And, Your Honor," she said, "attached to this letter is a copy of that very cashier's check obtained from the bank's records. It is endorsed on the back by 2 signatures, Richard Sterling and Eleanor Vance, and it was deposited into the very first corporate account of Sterling and Vance Properties." The courtroom was silent. All eyes were on Richard. His face, moments ago so confident, was now flushed with a deep-seated fury. He had grown so accustomed to telling his rags to riches story for so long that he had come to believe the fiction himself. This piece of paper was a ghost from a past he had deliberately buried. "It was a gift," Richard blurted out, his voice too loud. "David gave us that money as a wedding present." Evelyn raised an eyebrow. "A wedding present, Mr. Sterling? You were married 3 years before this check was issued. Furthermore, Mr. Vance's letter explicitly calls it a capital investment for a joint business venture. That doesn't sound like a gift. It sounds like a business transaction. A transaction, I might add, for which we can find no record of repayment. The first fissure in Richard's marble facade had appeared. He was a liar. He had lied under oath in his deposition and had just been caught. It wasn't a fatal blow, but it was a significant one. It damaged his credibility. It planted a seed of doubt. Charles Evans scrambled to do damage control. Your Honor, my client, a man of great success, clearly misremembered the details of an event from a quarter-century ago. This is a petty attempt to muddy the waters. $50,000, even if it was a loan, is a pittance compared to the company's billion-dollar valuation today. It's a rounding error. Is a foundation a rounding error, Mr. Evans? Evelyn countered softly. Or is it the most crucial part of any structure? That $50,000 invested in the property designed by my client yielded a 300% return in less than 6 months. That profit, not Mr. Sterling's savings, is what actually funded the company's expansion. The entire empire is built on that foundation, a foundation built with my client's money and my client's vision. Judge Parker looked from the check to Richard's furious face. She said nothing, but her expression was stern. The narrative was shifting. Eleanor Vance was no longer a simple housewife asking for a handout. She was a founding partner whose initial contribution had just been proven, and whose ex-husband had just lied about it in open court. Richard felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He looked at Sophia. The adoration in her eyes was now mixed with a hint of confusion and concern. This wasn't the quick, clean execution he had promised her. This was getting complicated. For the first time, he felt a pang of genuine unease. He had underestimated Eleanor, or more accurately, he had forgotten who she was, and he was beginning to suspect that her quiet, unassuming lawyer had a lot more to say. The true architect. Evelyn Miller let the impact of the first revelation sink in before continuing, her method deliberate and devastatingly effective. She wasn't attacking with a sledgehammer. She was dismantling Richard's fortress brick by brick. Now that we have established the financial foundation of Sterling and Vance Properties, she said, addressing the judge, let us turn to its creative foundation. Mr. Sterling has consistently presented himself as the singular visionary behind the company's success. She gestured toward a large screen that had been set up in the courtroom. We would like to present Exhibit C. This is a collection of magazine articles, architectural awards, and marketing materials from the last 20 years. Images began to flash on the screen, spreads from design and business magazines, photos of gleaming glass and steel homes, restored buildings, and luxurious condos. In every photo with a person, it was Richard. Richard in a hard hat on a construction site. Richard in a boardroom pointing at a model. Richard accepting an award. As you can see, Evelyn said, the public narrative has been carefully curated. Mr. Sterling is the face and the name of the brand. Charles Evans smirked. Ms. Miller is proving my point. The evidence of my client's success is overwhelming. I am not finished, Evelyn said coolly. Now, let's look at the actual work. We call our next witness Mr. Frank Hernandez, an elderly gentleman in his 70s with kind eyes and hands worn from labor, walked to the witness stand. Mr. Hernandez, Evelyn began, would you please state your occupation for the court? I was a project manager, he said in a clear, steady voice. I worked for Sterling and Vance for 18 years, since the very beginning. I was their third employee, thank you. Mr. Hernandez, you oversaw the construction of over 50 properties for the company. In your professional experience, who was responsible for the core design concepts, the aesthetic selections, the material selections, and the final staging that made those properties so desirable. Evans stood up. Objection. The witness is being asked about his direct professional experience, Judge Parker snapped. He may answer. Hernandez looked directly at the judge. In the early days, it was all Mrs. Sterling. Eleanor, she had the eye. Richard was great at getting the permits and managing the subcontractors, but Eleanor was the one who made the places special. She'd find some old mantelpiece at a salvage yard or sketch out a new kitchen design on a napkin that was just perfect. She picked every paint color, every tile, every light fixture. We didn't call it staging back then, but she was the one who furnished the first model homes using pieces from her own house. That's what sold them. Evelyn nodded. And as the company grew, did her role diminish? Not at all, Hernandez said. It just got bigger. She hired and managed the entire interior design team. Nothing was ordered. No blueprint was finalized without her sign-off on the aesthetic side. Richard handled the money and the schedule, but Eleanor created the product. All of us on the inside knew it. She was the soul of the company. Evelyn let his words sink in before asking her final question. Mr. Hernandez, why are you no longer with the company? The old man's face grew sad. Mr. Sterling let me go 2 years ago. He said they were streamlining, and that my pension was too expensive. I'd worked for him for 18 years. Thank you, Mr. Hernandez. No more questions. Evans declined to cross-examine, knowing Hernandez was a sympathetic and credible witness who would only do more damage. Evelyn then called a catering vendor who testified about the dozens of investor events Eleanor had hosted, providing menus and guest lists that corresponded to major funding deals. Then she called a former junior designer who tearfully recounted how Eleanor had mentored him and how his own designs were often presented to Richard by a senior designer who took the credit. The picture was becoming painfully clear. Eleanor was not a housewife who threw parties. She was an uncredited executive, the lead creative director of Sterling and Vance Properties, whose contributions had been systematically erased from the official history. Richard was furious. He felt as if his power, his very identity, was being publicly dissected and relabeled. This was no longer just about money. It was about his legacy. Evelyn Miller then walked back to her table and picked up a single sheet of paper. Your Honor, we have one final piece of evidence regarding the foundational identity of this company, she announced. It is something so obvious, it has been hidden in plain sight for 24 years. She held up the paper. It was a close-up of the Sterling and Vance Properties logo. Sterling and Vance, she said, her voice echoing in the silent room. We have established that Sterling is for Richard Sterling, and Vance is for Eleanor's maiden name. Mr. Sterling, in his public interviews, has often been asked about the name. He has claimed that Vance was chosen because it denotes durability, or because it just sounded long-lasting and elegant. A clever branding strategy. She paused, looking directly at Richard. But we believe there is something more. We believe the name itself is a contract, a promise of partnership, a truth Mr. Sterling has spent the last decade trying to forget. She set the paper down. But our most damning evidence has yet to be presented, and it goes far beyond the company's name or its history. It concerns its current legal ownership, a matter that Mr. Sterling himself arranged. What do you think of Eleanor's strategy? Do you believe her patience and cleverness were the keys to her victory? Share your thoughts in the comments section. The last document, Charles Evans laughed, a nervous, forced sound. Ownership, Your Honor. This is getting more ridiculous by the minute. The ownership of FDP Holding Corporation is in a series of complex trusts designed by the best financial minds in the country. My client, Mr. Sterling, is the sole beneficiary. It's unassailable. Is it, Mr. Evans? Evelyn asked, a glint in her eye. Because we have a document signed by your client that says otherwise. Richard's blood ran cold. The lawsuit, the clever lawyer, Robles, the document he had Eleanor sign to protect the family. He had a vague, nauseating memory of it. He had seen it as a clever trick, a temporary shell game. It had never occurred to him to reverse it. Why would it? He was in charge. She was his wife. It was all his. The nauseating knot in his stomach tightened into a ball of ice. He looked at Eleanor. Her serene expression hadn't changed, but now he saw it for what it was. It wasn't calm. It was certainty. Ms. Miller, to what document are you referring? Judge Parker asked, her voice tinged with an impatient curiosity. The courtroom was as quiet as a tomb. We would like to submit as evidence Exhibit F, Your Honor, Evelyn said. It is entitled a post-nuptial asset assignment agreement, dated May 14th, 7 years ago. Charles Evans's face went white. He shot a frantic look at Richard, who felt a jolt of pure adrenaline, the kind that precedes a car crash. He knew the document. He had orchestrated its creation, but he hadn't looked at it in years. He had forgotten the details. Trusting in its purpose to temporarily shield him, he had let it slide. The clerk handed the document to Judge Parker and a copy to Evans's table. Evans snatched it up, his eyes scanning the dense legal text with growing horror. Your Honor, Evelyn began to explain. 7 years ago, Sterling and Vance Properties faced a significant, though ultimately unsubstantiated, lawsuit. On the advice of his then attorney, Mr. Sterling decided to legally insulate his assets. The solution he chose was to transfer his majority interest in the primary holding company, the entity that owns all the subsidiaries, every property, every dollar, into his wife's name. A wave of gasps spread through the gallery. Sophia's perfectly manicured hand flew to her mouth. Evans found his voice, stammering. A temporary transfer, a common asset protection strategy. It was a temporary transfer, with the clear understanding that the assets would be returned once the legal threat was resolved. The law, Mr. Evans, Evelyn countered, her voice dangerously soft, doesn't concern itself with vague understandings. It concerns itself with what is written and what is signed. Please direct your attention to page 4, section 3, subsection B. Evans's fingers fumbled with the pages. Judge Parker was already there, her finger tracing the lines of text. The clause, Evelyn said, her words like hammer blows, stipulates the conditions under which the assets would revert to Mr. Sterling. It states that the ownership will be transferred back upon a joint written request submitted to the corporate trustee by both parties, Mr. Richard Sterling and Mrs. Eleanor Vance. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Your Honor, we have submitted an affidavit from the trustee, confirming that no such joint request was ever made or attempted. Richard's mind was racing, trying to climb out of the trap. She was supposed to sign it back, he whispered to Evans, his voice hoarse. Did you ever present her with a document to sign the assets back, Mr. Sterling? Evelyn asked, as if she could hear his thoughts. Richard was trapped. He hadn't. Once the lawsuit faded, he was consumed by a new mega project in Miami. The document, the transfer, it all slipped his mind. An administrative detail. He was the king. Paperwork was for commoners. He never imagined that his queen, the quiet, subservient woman he took for granted, would ever think to use the power he had so carelessly handed her. Evans, sweating profusely, tried another angle. Your Honor, this document was clearly signed under duress, the duress of a lawsuit, and was presented to Mrs. Sterling by my client's own attorney. She had no independent legal counsel. The agreement is unreasonable and should be nullified. It was a good legal argument, a standard one. Evelyn Miller was prepared for it. Unreasonable, Mr. Evans? She asked. My client was told by her husband that he was acting to protect their family's legacy. He told her he was placing his ultimate trust in her. He framed it as an act of partnership. She signed willingly, believing she was helping her husband and securing her children's future. Then, she delivered the final, crushing blow. Furthermore, Evelyn continued, Mr. Sterling was not the only one with legal counsel. Your Honor, we would like to submit Exhibit G. This was another document, a single page. It was a letter. This is a letter from Eleanor Sterling to her husband, dated 1 week after she signed the asset transfer. It was sent by certified mail, and we have the receipt right here. I'll read the relevant paragraph. She cleared her throat. Richard, I have signed the papers as you asked. I trust you to know what is best for the security of our family. My only condition, as we discussed, is that this transfer is permanent. You have always said that everything you build is for the children and me. This document now makes that promise a legal reality. It is my and their security in case anything ever happens to you or us. I consider this matter settled, and the ownership of the company now formally rests in me for the agreement we both signed. Richard's jaw went slack. He had never seen that letter. Never. Wait, certified mail. His assistant Sarah must have signed for it. Sarah, whom he had fired 6 months ago after she mixed up his lunch reservation. He had a vague memory of her handing him a stack of mail, official-looking envelopes he had told her to just file away. He never read them. He had more important things to do. Your Honor, Evelyn concluded, her voice ringing with finality. Mr. Sterling received this letter. He never challenged it. He never replied. He never took any action to reverse the transfer. By his own inaction and silence, he legally accepted her terms. He was so confident in his control over his wife that he ignored a legally binding statement that divested him of his entire fortune. He didn't forget. He just didn't care. He believed that documents, that laws, that the very promises he made didn't apply to him. She turned and looked at Richard Sterling, her eyes filled with a cold, clear fire. He was wrong. The room was completely silent. Charles Evans sank into his chair, his face the color of ashes. He shuffled his papers, but it was a useless gesture. He was a general whose army had turned out to be a parade of cardboard cutouts. Richard Sterling no longer looked at his lawyer, or the judge, or even Eleanor. He was staring into the void, into the ghost of his own monumental arrogance. He had built an empire, but he had been too proud to read the fine print. He had set a trap to protect himself, and then, in his hubris, he had walked right into it, pulled the string, and closed the cage door from the inside. And standing outside that cage, holding the only key, was the woman he had tried to discard, as if she were yesterday's news. What do you think of Eleanor's strategy? Do you believe her patience and cleverness were the keys to her victory? Let us know in the comments section. The king is dead, Judge. Helen Parker took off her glasses and placed them deliberately on the polished wood of the bench. The action, small and neat, seemed to suck all the sound from the room. She rubbed the bridge of her nose, her eyes closed for a moment as if in contemplation. To the gallery, it looked like a moment of judicial reflection. To Richard Sterling, it felt like an eternity in the electric chair. The judge wasn't just considering the facts. She was gathering the full weight of the consequences she was about to unleash. When her eyes opened, they were devoid of warmth. They were the eyes of the law itself, impersonal, relentless, and absolute. She looked down, not at the lawyers, but directly at Richard, pinning him with a gaze that stripped away his tailored suit and confident facade, leaving only the scared, duplicitous man beneath. Mr. Sterling, she began, her voice quiet, but with a cold steel edge that cut through the silence. In my 20 years on this bench, I have seen a great many dissolution proceedings. I have seen acrimony, sadness, and greed. I have seen complex financial arrangements designed to hide assets, and I have seen simple ones designed to ensure fairness. But rarely, she paused, letting the word hang in the air, have I seen a case where one party has shown such a profound and willful ignorance of his own legal and personal history. Richard's throat went dry. This wasn't a ruling. It was a vivisection. You sat before this court, Judge Parker continued, and under oath in your deposition, you built a myth of the solo genius, the self-made titan who forged an empire alone. You erased your partner. You testified that your company's foundational capital was your own, when we have seen irrefutable proof, a cashier's check endorsed by your own hand, that it came from the family of the woman you now seek to cast off. That was not a lapse in memory, Mr. Sterling. That was perjury. Charles Evans flinched as if he had been struck. His client had not just been out-strategized, he had been exposed as a simple liar. The judge continued her dissection. You then proceeded to minimize Mrs. Sterling's contributions to mere hobbies and social duties. And yet, witness after witness, from your own long-term project manager to the very people who designed your products, have testified that Eleanor Vance was not an accessory to your success. She was its principal architect. She was not merely a partner in your marriage. She was the founding partner of Sterling and Vance Properties, a truth hidden in the very name you proudly display on your buildings, a name you chose to deliberately misinterpret to the public. Richard felt his blood pounding in his ears. He could feel Sophia's stare at the side of his face, no longer adoring, but questioning, horrified. His mind, in a desperate act of self-preservation, recalled a conversation from a year ago at the country club. He had been on a high, laughing. The key to success, he had pontificated, is never to let anyone else hold the real power. The details, the fine print, that's where you keep your kingdom safe. He had believed it. He had believed he was the master of the details. Judge Parker picked up the post-nuptial asset assignment agreement, holding it as if it were radioactive. Which brings us to this document, the ultimate act of arrogance. Your attorney, Mr. Evans, argues that it is unreasonable, signed under duress. But the true duress, it seems, was your own, the fear of a lawsuit. You used your wife as a legal shield. You presented it to her as an act of trust, a way to protect the family. You made her the vessel for your entire fortune, confident in your power to command her to give it back at will. She put down the document and picked up the certified letter. But Mrs. Vance, it turns out, understood the power you had given her far better than you did. She sent you this letter, a clear and unequivocal statement that she understood the transfer to be permanent. It was sent by certified mail, Mr. Sterling. Its delivery is a matter of legal record. Your defense is that you were too busy, too important, to read your own mail. You delegated, you dismissed, you ignored. You treated a legal statement that altered the ownership of your billion-dollar empire with the same attention you would give to a piece of junk mail. She leaned forward, her voice lowering, but losing none of its intensity. In the law, Mr. Sterling, silence has meaning. When presented with a clear statement of terms, your failure to challenge, object, or even reply constitutes acceptance. You had 7 years to challenge this. You had 7 years to submit the joint request to revert the transfer. You did nothing. Because in your world, Eleanor Vance was not an entity with rights. She was an extension of your will. You didn't believe you needed to reverse it, because you never believed the power had ever truly left your hands. It was the most expensive assumption of your life. The courtroom was now so silent that the frantic scratching of the court reporter's pen sounded like a wildfire. Sophia Marine no longer looked at Richard. She was staring at her own crimson-painted nails, the dream of a future as Mrs. Sterling dissolving into a nightmare. The man she had latched onto was not a king. He was a fool who had given away his crown and had forgotten where he'd put it. Richard Sterling felt a cold wave wash over him, a horrifying clarity. The walls of the courtroom seemed to be closing in. The smug confidence that had been his armor for decades had been peeled away, and he was naked and exposed. He looked at Eleanor. Her face was serene, but her eyes held the knowledge of this day, a knowledge she had carried alone for years. He had mistaken her silence for submission, her patience for weakness. Now he saw it. It had been discipline. Therefore, Judge Parker declared, her voice rising to a formal, proclamatory tone, this court is not here to divide the assets of Sterling and Vance properties, as there is nothing to divide. The assets are not marital property, subject to equitable distribution. She stood, a black-robed figure of ultimate authority, and delivered the final verdict, each word a nail in the coffin of Richard Sterling's life. Based on the documents submitted and verified, this court confirms that full legal and controlling ownership of FDP Holding Corporation and all of its subsidiary assets, real estate properties, and financial accounts was legally and irrevocably transferred to Eleanor Vance 7 years ago. This is not an asset split. It is a confirmation of ownership. She took one last sharp breath. The entirety of the assets are now hers. The silence that followed was a physical blow. Then came the sound. The bottle of kava, forgotten and slick with condensation, slipped from Richard's nerveless hands. It didn't shatter. It hit the marble floor with a dull, sickening thud, the sound of a fallen monarch. The bottle of kava rolled ignominiously across the floor and came to rest near the witness stand, its promise of celebration now a mocking epitaph. Richard opened his mouth to shout, to object, to rage against the impossible injustice of it all. But all that came out was a dry, raspy gasp. His power, his voice, his very identity had been stripped from him. He was a nobody. Judge Parker hit her gavel once, the sharp crack echoing like a gunshot through the graveyard silence. This court stands in recess. As she walked out of the room, chaos erupted. Reporters scrambled. Cameras flashed. Charles Evans slumped into his chair, covering his face with his hands, his career in ashes. Sophia Maureen stood up, gave one last look at the empty man she had bet her future on, a look of pure, unadulterated contempt, and walked out without saying a word. In the middle of the pandemonium, Evelyn Miller placed a gentle hand on Eleanor's arm. Eleanor stood, her movements fluid and unhurried. She smoothed the front of her simple navy dress, a gesture of quiet finality. Her eyes met Evelyn's, and she gave a small, grateful nod. Her victory wasn't in the chaos erupting around her, but in the silence she had finally won. She turned and walked toward the exit, not looking back at the man who was now just an accessory in a life she was leaving behind. She walked out of the courtroom, not into the arms of another man, but into the embrace of her own reclaimed future. The empire was hers. This story reminds us that true strength isn't always loud and boastful. Sometimes it's in the silent details, the patient planning, and the courage to wait for the perfect moment to reveal the truth. Richard Sterling thought he was closing a chapter, but Eleanor Vance showed him he had never even read the book. If this story of justice, strategy, and ultimate vindication resonated with you, please leave a comment, like it, and share it with someone who appreciates a story where the tables turn in the most spectacular way. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We bring you the most compelling real-life dramas and poetic justice stories every week. What did you think of the new names and the stories ending? Don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more stories of redemption and love. What is the price of betrayal? For Ethan Vance, it was nothing. He thought he could discard his wife of 10 years, the woman who built his world, like yesterday's news. He thought he could parade his new, younger model, Chloe, at the most exclusive event of the year, the grand gala of the Met Arts Foundation, and call it a victory. He imagined his ex-wife, Sarah, sitting at home, broken and irrelevant. But he forgot one crucial detail. When you push someone to the ground, you have no idea who they'll meet when they stand up again. Tonight, Ethan Vance is about to learn that lesson in front of the elite of New York City, because his past is about to walk through the door, and his future is opening it for her. The air in the penthouse, overlooking Central Park, was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and a simmering arrogance. Ethan Vance adjusted the silk lapels of his Tom Ford tuxedo, catching his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling window. The city lights twinkled below, a sprawling kingdom that he felt he was finally ready to rule. "How do I look?" he asked, though it wasn't a question. It was a demand for affirmation. Chloe Davies, lounging on the white leather sofa, looked up from her phone. Her dress was a testament to Ethan's recent bonus, a fiery red, backless Alexandra Vautier that clung to her gym-toned body. "Like $1 million, my love." "No, like $1 billion?" he grinned, a flash of perfectly veneered teeth. Ethan liked the sound of that. It was aspirational. For now, he was a senior vice president at Sterling Capital, a respectable private equity firm. But respectability wasn't the goal. Dominance was. And tonight, the Met Arts Foundation Gala was his coronation. "This dress is everything, Ethan. I'm going to be the talk of the party," Chloe said, getting up to do a twirl. "We're going to be the talk of the party," he corrected her, his voice soft but firm. He walked over, placing his hands on her waist. "This is our debut. The world needs to see the new Ethan Vance, the real Ethan Vance." The unsaid part hung in the air, not the Ethan and Sarah Vance. Sarah, his ex-wife. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, but the bitter taste still lingered in his mouth. Not of regret, but of annoyance. The process had been a hassle, a tedious untangling of a life he had outgrown. 10 years they had been together, since college. He now saw her as a relic of his past, a black-and-white photograph in his new, full-color life. He remembered her always in sensible clothes, her hair tied back, her hands smudged with charcoal or paint from her hobbies. She had been an architectural student when they met, brimming with passion. "I want to design spaces that breathe," she used to say. But her ambition had been quietly shelved, year after year, to support his. She had managed their home, organized his work dinners, proofread his reports, and celebrated his promotions as if they were her own. She had been the perfect corporate wife, the scaffolding that allowed him to build his career, and like all scaffolding, she was meant to be dismantled once the structure was complete. The last argument replayed in his head, a scene he had edited for his own comfort. "You don't even see me anymore, Ethan," Sarah had said, her voice trembling but not breaking. She was standing in the kitchen of their old apartment, the one she had meticulously renovated herself. "I do see you, Sarah. I just don't think we want the same things anymore," he had replied coldly, looking at his watch. He had a dinner reservation with Chloe. "What is it that I want that's so different?" she had asked, her eyes pleading. "You're content," he had said the word, sounding like an insult on his tongue. "You're happy with this house, your little art projects. My world is getting bigger. I need someone who can keep up." He had conveniently omitted the part where she had found the hotel receipts, the lingerie he hadn't bought for her, the smiling photos of him and Chloe on a business trip to the Hamptons. He had framed the narrative for himself, and for their few remaining mutual friends, as a conscious uncoupling, a divergence of paths. He was soaring into the stratosphere. She was content to stay on the ground. "Do you think she'll find out about tonight?" Chloe asked, pulling him out of his reverie. She was applying a final coat of ruby red lipstick. Ethan scoffed. "Who? Sarah? God, I hope so. I hope someone sends her a link to a gossip column. Maybe then she'll understand what she lost." He pictured her in her small apartment in the West Village, probably sketching something no one would ever see, or reading a book. The image filled him with a satisfying sense of superiority. He had won. "Ready to go?" He offered his arm. "Ready to make an entrance?" Chloe purred, taking it. As the elevator descended, Ethan felt a surge of adrenaline. The gala wasn't just a party. It was a battlefield of influence and perception. It was where deals were whispered over champagne, and fortunes were measured by the cut of a suit or the carats of a diamond. Tonight, with Chloe on his arm, he wasn't just attending. He was making a statement. He was powerful. He was desirable. And he was untethered from the quiet, unassuming past that was his first wife. He was completely and blissfully ignorant of the fact that scaffolding, once removed, can reveal a masterpiece that was hidden in plain sight, and that masterpieces, unlike shiny new buildings, are timeless and priceless. The Met Gala, a fateful encounter. The black Escalade pulled up to the grand, floodlit entrance of the Metropolitan Museum of Art. A river of luxury vehicles flowed around it, depositing New York's high society onto a plush red carpet that snaked up the iconic steps. The air crackled with the flash of cameras and the low murmur of excited chatter. "It's showtime," Ethan whispered, squeezing Chloe's hand. A uniformed attendant opened their door, and they stepped out into the crisp autumn air. The paparazzi, initially focused on a Hollywood actress ahead of them, turned a few lenses their way. Ethan straightened his bow tie, a practiced motion of casual importance. He guided Chloe forward, his hand placed possessively on the small of her back. She played her part perfectly, smiling dazzlingly, tilting her head just so. A scarlet siren. They were a vision of modern success, the sleekly suited financier and his beautiful young companion. A few photographers yelled, "Over here! Big smile!" They knew he was from Sterling Capital, a firm with deep pockets and a rising reputation. They were worth a few shots. Inside, the great hall had been transformed into an ethereal wonderland. Towering arrangements of white orchids and crystal branches reached toward the vaulted ceiling. Waiters in crisp white jackets moved silently through the crowd, balancing trays of glistening champagne flutes and intricate canapes. The sound was a symphony of clinking glasses, sophisticated laughter, and the soft swell of a string quartet playing in a distant corner. Ethan breathed it all in. This was his element. "Vance, you old dog," a voice boomed. It was Mr. Peterson, a managing director at a rival firm, a man whose respect Ethan craved. "Mr. Peterson, great to see you," Ethan said, shaking his hand with confident warmth. "You know my partner, Chloe Davies?" "A pleasure," Peterson said, his eyes doing a quick, appreciative scan of Chloe's dress. "You two make quite a pair. Sterling Capital must be treating you well." "Can't complain," Ethan said, with a modest shrug that was the exact opposite. As they waded deeper into the crowd, Ethan felt the effect of their arrival. He saw the glances, the whispers behind hands. He saw some of his colleagues' wives looking Chloe up and down with a mix of envy and disdain, which he found particularly amusing. He saw Ms. Reynolds, the city's most notorious gossip columnist, making a mental note of their presence. perfect. By morning, his photo would be on page 6, cementing his new status. He was a conqueror, enjoying his spoils. He steered Chloe toward the main ballroom, making a point of stopping and chatting with everyone who mattered. He was charming, witty, and utterly magnetic. He introduced Chloe not just as his partner, but with little details. The brilliant marketing mind behind. Oh, the woman with impeccable taste and style. Giving her a veneer of substance he felt reflected well on him. "I'm so glad we came," Chloe whispered to him, her eyes wide with the glamour of it all. "This is a different world." "Get used to it," he said softly. "This is our world now." His gaze swept the room, and he felt a pang of something he refused to name. He saw couples who had been married for decades, men and women who had weathered storms together. He saw the natural comfort between them, the shared smiles that spoke of a deep history. It reminded him, just for a second, of what he and Sarah used to be like at these things. She always stayed close, her hand finding his in a crowd, a silent signal of support. She knew who to talk to, who to avoid, who had the real power versus the illusion of it. She had been his social navigator. He pushed the thought away. That was the old Ethan, the dependent Ethan. He didn't need a navigator anymore. He was the captain of his own ship. Then he saw exactly who he was looking for. His boss, the formidable CEO of Sterling Capital, Mr. Vance, standing with a small group near the silent auction display. Mr. Vance was an industry titan, a man whose approval could make or break careers. "Wait here, Chloe," he instructed, handing her a glass of champagne. "Time to pay my respects." He walked over, putting on his most serious, ambitious face. "Mr. Vance, a wonderful night." Mr. Vance turned, his expression neutral. "Vance, good of you to come. The firm must be represented." He didn't introduce Ethan to the men he was with. A subtle but clear power play. "Of course, sir. It's the event of the season," Ethan said, trying to elbow his way into the conversation. "By the way, that new acquisition in the tech sector was a masterstroke. The numbers are looking even better than projected." Mr. Vance nodded dryly. "We're pleased." His attention was already wandering. The conversation was clearly over. Slightly rebuffed, but not deterred, Ethan retreated. It didn't matter. His presence had been noted. He rejoined Chloe, his ego still fully inflated. He had the beautiful woman, the high-powered job, the bright future. He was untouchable. It was then that the atmosphere in the great hall began to change. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was a subtle shift in pressure, like the air before a storm. The murmur of the crowd quieted, and then began to swell again, but with a different tone. Heads turned not in a general scan of the room, but in one specific direction, toward the grand entrance. A wave of concentrated silence spread from the door inward. The photographers, who had been lazily snapping pictures of the crowd, suddenly scrambled back to the red carpet, their flashes firing in a frantic, continuous barrage. "What's happening?" Chloe asked, standing on her tiptoes to see over the crowd. "Did a movie star arrive?" Ethan craned his neck, annoyed by the interruption, and saw the reason for the commotion. A car, not an Escalade or a Bentley, but a rare, impossibly sleek Bugatti Veyron, a multi-million-dollar ghost of a car, had pulled up. It was the kind of vehicle that announced not just wealth, but a different stratosphere of existence. A doorman, looking flustered and overly deferential, rushed to open the passenger door. Ethan watched, mildly curious. Who could command this kind of attention? And then he saw her. A woman emerged from the car. The crowd between them parted for a moment, creating a perfect, unobstructed view from the ballroom entrance to the front steps. For a split second, his brain refused to process the image. It was like seeing a ghost, but a ghost reimagined by a master artist. It was Sarah, but it wasn't the Sarah he knew. It wasn't the woman in sensible shoes and quiet cardigans. This woman wore a midnight blue silk gown, a custom Schiaparelli creation that seemed to pour over her figure, shimmering under the lights. It was elegant, daring, and utterly breathtaking. Her hair, once pulled back, was now styled in loose, glamorous waves that cascaded over her bare shoulders. Around her neck was a collar of sapphires and diamonds that didn't just sparkle. It blazed, catching the light from every direction. Ethan's champagne glass suddenly felt heavy in his hand. His mouth went dry, and Chloe's question from earlier echoed in his mind. A cruel taunt from a universe that was suddenly tilting wildly on its axis. Do you think she'll find out about tonight? She hadn't just found out. She had arrived. And when a man stepped out of the hypercar's driver's side, a man who exuded a quiet, impregnable confidence that made Ethan's own bravado seem like a child's tantrum, Ethan Vance realized his perfectly constructed world was about to shatter into a million pieces. The king is dead. Long live the queen. The man who emerged from the driver's side of the Bugatti was Julian Thorne. The name itself carried weight in rooms like this, but it was spoken in hushed, reverent tones, not yelled by paparazzi. Julian wasn't new money, nor was he merely old money. He was dynastic money, a fortune rooted in banking and energy that had been deftly pivoted into 21st century tech and sustainable power. At 42, he was the CEO of Thorne Innovations, a global juggernaut that ate companies like Sterling Capital for breakfast. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed, and his presence at any event instantly made it the event. He wore a simple étui, impeccably tailored black tuxedo. No flashy watch, no ostentatious jewelry. He didn't need to. His presence was his statement. He walked around the car and offered his hand to Sarah. The way he looked at her wasn't the possessive gaze Ethan gave Chloe. It was a look of genuine admiration and deep affection. He said something to her too low for anyone else to hear, and she laughed. It was the sound of her laughter that hit Ethan like a physical blow. It was lighter than he remembered. Freer. It was a sound he hadn't heard in years, a sound he had unknowingly choked out. The crowd, which had parted out of curiosity, now parted out of respect. Julian Thorne and his breathtaking companion began their ascent of the steps. The flashes were blinding. "Ethan! Ethan! Who is that?" Chloe's voice was sharp, tinged with a note of unfamiliar panic. The confidence had evaporated from her face, replaced by a confused frown. "That woman, she looks familiar." Ethan couldn't speak. His throat was a concrete knot. He felt 100 pairs of eyes on him. People who knew him, who knew about his divorce, were now looking from the radiant vision in the doorway to him and his scarlet-clad partner. The comparison was brutal. He felt a hot, stinging shame creep up his neck. He and Chloe had tried to make a splash. Sarah and her escort had just created a tsunami. That's Sarah!" He finally choked out the name, and it tasted like ash. Chloe's jaw dropped. Her perfectly painted lips parted in disbelief. "That's Sarah, your ex-wife? The one you said was normal?" Her voice was an incredulous shriek. She looked from Sarah to Ethan, and for the first time, a flicker of doubt, of reevaluation, entered her eyes. Sarah and Julian stopped at the top of the steps. He guided her with a light touch on her elbow, his movements fluid and assured. They didn't walk in search of attention. They simply commanded it. As they entered the great hall, the string quartet seemed to falter for a moment before resuming. "Mr. Vance, Ethan's boss, who had barely given him the time of day just minutes earlier, immediately broke off his conversation and began moving toward the entrance with a determined gait. A shark sensing blood, or in this case, money, in the water. "Julian! What a pleasant surprise!" Mr. Vance boomed, his voice now exuding an obsequiousness that was sickening to witness. Julian greeted him with a polite, reserved nod. "Gerard, a fine evening for a worthy cause." His gaze was steady, not missing the frantic energy his arrival had caused. And then his eyes, a deep, intelligent blue, swept the room and landed for a brief, chilling moment on Ethan. There was no malice in the look, no anger. There was something far worse, complete, indifferent dismissal. It was the look a man gives to something he is about to step on, without even noticing it. But Sarah's eyes found him too. Their gazes crossed through the sea of slack-jawed faces. Ethan had expected to see triumph in her eyes, or perhaps a flicker of old pain. He saw neither. He saw a quiet, clear strength he had never seen before. It was the look of a woman who knew her own worth, a woman who was no longer defined by him or his opinion of her. In that single look, she stripped him of all his power. She wasn't the discarded wife. She was a queen who had simply moved to a grander palace. The realization hit Ethan with the force of a physical blow. This wasn't just a chance encounter. This was a statement. But it wasn't Sarah's statement to him. It was a statement to the world about who she was now. He was simply an insignificant spectator to her ascension. The whispers erupted around him, venomous and quick. "That's Ethan Vance's ex-wife? My God, what did he do to her? That's Julian Thorne from Thorne Innovations. He's with her. I heard the divorce was messy. Clearly she landed on her feet, and on a pile of gold. Look at Ethan's face. And who is he with? So tacky." The word tacky hit Chloe like a slap. She winced. Her scarlet dress suddenly felt cheap and loud, next to Sarah's timeless elegance. The looks of admiration she had received earlier now felt like jeers. She was no longer a prize. She was a consolation prize, and a bad one at that. She looked at Ethan not with adoration, but with accusation. His promises of a bigger, better world were crumbling before her very eyes. He had sold her a ticket to the A-list, but it seemed his ex-wife owned the whole venue. Ethan felt trapped. He wanted to run, to disappear, but he was frozen in place, a statue of humiliation in a Tom Ford suit. He had come to the gala to be the man of the night, but in the space of 5 minutes, he had become the laughingstock. Sarah, guided by Julian, began to move toward the ballroom, greeting a few people with a warm, genuine smile. She moved with a grace he never knew she possessed. He had always seen her as sensible, practical. He never realized that with the right support, sensible people could fly. He saw his boss, Mr. Vance, fawning over Julian, laughing a little too loudly at something he said. Then Mr. Vance turned and gesticulated toward Sarah with profound respect. They were heading their way. Not for him, but toward the main stage at the front of the ballroom. Their path would take them directly past where Ethan and Chloe were, rooted in their own personal hell. The moment he had dreaded was now inevitable. A confrontation was coming. But as Sarah walked toward him, looking regal and serene, he knew with sick certainty that this would not be a confrontation between equals. It would be an execution. The few meters of Persian carpet that separated them felt like a mile-long walk of shame. The air thinned around Ethan. Every rustle of Sarah's Schiaparelli dress seemed to mock the synthetic sheen of Chloe's gown. Julian Thorne walked with the unhurried stride of a man who owns every room he enters. His eyes were fixed ahead, but Ethan felt his peripheral power. "Mr. Vance," still attached to Julian's side like a pilot fish to a shark, was the first to see Ethan. A flash of annoyance crossed his face, as if Ethan were an unfortunately placed piece of furniture in his path. "Vance," he said, his tone clipped and dismissive. Julian and Sarah stopped. The moment hung in time. The ambient noise of the gala seemed to fade to a dull roar, focusing all sound and light on this impossibly awkward tableau. Sarah looked at Ethan, her expression serene. There was no anger, no pity. It was the polite, distant look you give to a former colleague from a job long since past. "Ethan," she said, her voice even and cold. It was the first time she had said his name, and it sounded alien, clinical. Ethan's pride, bruised and battered, made one last pathetic attempt. He felt an overwhelming desire to assert himself, to prove he wasn't the pathetic figure everyone now saw. He gestured stiffly at Chloe, who looked as if she wanted the floor to swallow her whole. "Sarah, you remember Chloe?" he said, the words coming out harsher than he intended. It was a petty, desperate jab, an attempt to remind her of the reason their marriage had ended. Sarah's gaze moved to Chloe for a fraction of a second. She gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't a greeting between equals, but a dismissal. She didn't even say her name. She had rendered Chloe completely insignificant, with a single word. Chloe visibly winced, her face reddening to a shade that clashed horribly with her dress. Julian Thorne, who had remained silent, finally spoke. His voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the tension with the precision of a surgeon's scalpel. He looked directly at Ethan, but his words were for his boss. "Gerard," he said, his tone dangerously soft. "I wasn't aware Sterling Capital was part of our current philanthropic portfolio." Mr. Vance blanched. "Julian, we are great admirers of the Foundation's work. We contribute annually." "Admirable," Julian replied, his eyes still fixed on Ethan. He then shifted his gaze slightly to include Chloe. "The Foundation's work this year is focused on supporting emerging artists and designers, women of substance and vision, who may have been overlooked." He let the words hang in the air, each one a perfectly aimed dart. Ethan felt his blood run cold, but the masterstroke was yet to come. Julian turned his full attention back to Sarah, his expression softening into one of genuine pride. He placed a hand gently on her back. "But introductions are in order," he said, his voice now projecting slightly for those nearby to hear. "Gerard, I don't believe you've been formally introduced to my fiancée." A gasp, a collective intake of breath, was audible from the surrounding guests. Fiancée. The word detonated in the center of the room. This wasn't an affair. It wasn't a rebound. It was a commitment from one of the world's most elusive and powerful men. Mr. Vance's eyes bulged, then narrowed in a frantic, dawning comprehension. He looked from Sarah's serene face to Ethan's horrified one. The professional calculus was happening in his head at lightning speed. My sincerest congratulations, Julian. To both of you," Vance stammered, extending a hand to Sarah. "A pleasure. I'm Mr. Thorne, Amelia Romero." She provided her maiden name. She shook his hand firmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you, Gerard." Ethan felt the world spinning. Romero. She had shed his name. She had shed everything that reminded her of him. But Julian wasn't finished. This wasn't a simple social massacre. It was a methodical dissection. "But you are mistaken about one thing, Gerard," Julian continued, a faint, sharp smile touching his lips. "Amelia isn't just my fiancée. She's the reason we're all here tonight." He gestured vaguely toward the stage at the far end of the ballroom. "The Foundation's central project this year, the one my firm has funded with a $50 million grant, is the new Thorne Wing for Contemporary Design at the museum." Mr. Vance nodded enthusiastically. Yes, of course. We've all been eagerly awaiting the unveiling of the designs tonight. Julian's smile widened. He looked at Sarah with pure adoration. Then allow me to introduce you to the creative force behind it, the winner of the International Blind Competition, the principal architect and lead designer of the entire Thorn Wing, the one and only Amelia Romero. Silence. A deep, resonant silence fell over the gala. Ethan Thorne felt the floor drop out from under him. It couldn't be. The small art projects, the sketches he had dismissed, the passion he had called a hobby, it was all real. While he was climbing his ladder, she had been secretly building an empire of her own. She hadn't just landed on her feet. She had built her own damn launch pad. Mr. Vance stood completely stunned. He looked at Sarah with a completely new kind of respect, one that bordered on awe. Then he looked at Ethan with a nascent, murderous rage. He finally understood. Ethan Thorne, his arrogant, conceited vice president, had discarded a woman who was now inextricably linked to a $50 million project with Julian Thorne, a man with whom Vance had been trying to get a meeting for over a year. The humiliation was absolute. It was a public, professional, and personal annihilation. Ethan had come to the gala to show off his new, shiny life, only to have the woman he had thrown away unveiled as the true masterpiece of the evening. What do you think of Sarah's incredible transformation and Ethan's downfall? Let us know in the comments. We read every single one. The price of betrayal. The fall of Ethan Vance. The rest of the night was a blur of exquisite torture for Ethan. He and Chloe remained frozen in place for a few moments, the epicenter of a gossip shockwave that was now radiating through the gala at light speed. Every whispered conversation, every pointed finger, every smirk was a new stab of humiliation. Chloe was the first to break. "You told me she was a nobody," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You said she was a sad little artist living in a shoebox. You said I was the upgrade. How was I supposed to know?" Ethan shot back, his voice cracking. He was defensive. Lost. "She never, ever did anything like this before. Maybe because you never left her." Chloe's eyes were cold and calculating. She was reevaluating her investment, and the stock was plummeting. The life of glamour Ethan had promised was a lie, a cheap imitation of the real thing, the life Sarah now effortlessly inhabited. Chloe had not upgraded. She had been conned. Before Ethan could reply, his boss, Mr. Vance, was back. His face was a storm. He grabbed Ethan's arm with an iron grip and forcibly steered him to a secluded corner behind a marble column. "Are you an idiot, Vance?" Mr. Vance growled, his voice a lethal whisper. "Or just a stupid fool?" "Sir, I had no idea," Ethan stammered. "Shut up," Mr. Vance cut him off. "Just shut up. Do you have any idea what you've done? We've been trying to do business with Thorne Innovations for 2 years. Our entire new tech fund strategy hinges on getting a piece of their new energy portfolio. I've been calling their office every week, getting blocked by their assistants. And tonight, I finally meet him. And who is he engaged to? My foolish vice president's ex-wife. The woman you cheated on and abandoned. The woman who is now the lead designer for his $50 million project. Do you see the problem here, Ethan? Connect the dots for me." Ethan's mind was a blank wall of panic. "I can fix this. I can talk to her." Mr. Vance let out a short, barking laugh that was devoid of humor. "You will do no such thing. You will not approach Ms. Romero or Mr. Thorne. You will take your date," he said the word with utter distaste, "and you will quietly leave through a side door. And I suggest you spend the weekend updating your resume. My office, Monday morning, 8 a.m. sharp." Mr. Vance's voice fell to an icy calm that was more terrifying than his rage. "You're fired." He turned and walked away, leaving Ethan trembling, his career flashing before his eyes. Meanwhile, on the other side of the ballroom, Sarah and Julian had been graciously welcomed to the head table, hosted by the museum director and the foundation heads. The conversation was lively, focused on art, architecture, and the future of design. Sarah spoke with an eloquence and passion that captivated everyone. She was not just a fiancée, she was a visionary in her own right. Later, during a quiet moment, as they stood on a private balcony overlooking the city, Julian put a cashmere shawl over her shoulders. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, his concern genuine. Sarah looked at the sparkling skyline, the same one Ethan had looked at from his penthouse. But her view was different. She wasn't trying to conquer it. She was part of it. "I am," she said, and she meant it. "For years, I felt like a shadow. I thought his validation was the only thing that made me real. Seeing him tonight, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel revenge. I felt nothing. He's just a man I used to know." She turned to Julian, her eyes shining with gratitude. "You saw something in me, Julian, when I couldn't even see it in myself." He smiled, tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. "I saw a brilliant artist. I saw a woman of incredible strength and integrity who deserved to have her name in lights, not hidden in the footnotes of someone else's story. I just provided the framework. You are the masterpiece." Their moment was interrupted by applause from the ballroom. The presentation was about to begin. It was time for Sarah to take the stage. Back in the corner, David's world had completely collapsed. He turned to go back to Chloe to tell her they were leaving, but she was already gone. He scanned the crowd and saw her talking to Mr. Peterson, the rival firm's director. She was laughing at something he said, placing a delicate hand on his arm, her scarlet dress a beacon of opportunism. She had already cut her losses and was looking for her next investor. Defeated, Ethan stumbled toward a side exit, ignoring the curious and pitying glances. As he pushed open the door into the cold night air, the sound of applause echoed from the ballroom, followed by the clear, confident voice of the museum director. "And now I have the great honor of welcoming to the stage the creative genius behind the new wing, the one and only Sarah Romero." Ethan did not look back. He couldn't bear it. He had walked into the gala thinking he was the king of his own story, only to become a footnote in hers, the final accounting and a new masterpiece. 2 weeks later, the city was still abuzz with talk. The society pages and architectural magazines alike were filled with breathless praise for the Thorn Wing. Sarah Romero was the talk of the town, lauded not as a billionaire's fiancée, but as a formidable new talent in the world of design. Her vision, a fusion of sustainable materials and light-filled human-centered spaces, was hailed as revolutionary. Sarah stood in the middle of a cavernous, sun-drenched loft in the West Village, which now served as the headquarters of Romero Design Studio. Blueprints were spread across huge oak tables, and a team of young, brilliant architects were animatedly discussing material samples. The air vibrated with creativity and purpose. This was her world, a world she had built from the ashes of her old life. Her phone buzzed. It was a message from Julian. "Thinking of you, don't work too hard. The world can wait one day for its next beautiful building." She smiled. Their relationship was a calm harbor in her new, busy life. He never overshadowed her, never competed with her. He simply celebrated her success, finding as much joy in it as she did. He was a partner, not an owner. There was a soft knock on her office door. Her assistant, a sharp young woman named Clara, poked her head in. "Ms. Romero," she began. "There's a man here. He has a letter for you. He insists on giving it to you in person." Sarah looked up, annoyed by the interruption. "I'm busy, Clara. Have him leave it with you." "I tried, ma'am," Clara said, her voice dropping. "It's Ethan Vance." Sarah froze. The name felt like a relic from another era, a ghost at the party. She hadn't seen or heard from him since that night. She had heard the whispers that he'd been forced to sell the penthouse, that he was living in a small rental in a less fashionable neighborhood, that he was consulting, the universal euphemism for being unemployed. A cold knot of dread formed in her stomach. A part of her wanted to tell Clara to have security remove him, but curiosity, and perhaps the last lingering thread of a shared history, won out. "It's fine. Let him in." Ethan walked into the office. The change was shocking. The impeccably tailored Tom Ford suit was gone, replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting blazer. The arrogance had vanished, replaced by a desperate, haunted look in his eyes. He was thinner, and the lines of failure were etched around his mouth. He clutched a simple white envelope in his hand, as if it were a lifeline. "Sarah," he said, his voice raspy. "Ethan," she replied coldly. She did not stand. She did not offer him a seat. She remained behind her large desk, blueprints spread out between them like a barricade. "What do you want?" I wanted to give you this," he said, taking a step forward and placing the envelope on the edge of her desk. He would not meet her eyes. "I just want you to read it. That's all I ask." She looked at the envelope, then back at his worn face. The powerful, intimidating man she had once been married to was gone. In his place was a stranger, hollowed out by his own choices. "Fine," she said. "You've given it to me. You can go now." He looked up, a flicker of his old frustration showing. "Can't we just talk for 5 minutes, for old time's sake?" "We have nothing to talk about, Ethan," Sarah said, her voice firm but not cruel. "Our time is over. Please leave." Defeated, he slowly nodded and shuffled away, like a man twice his age. Sarah looked at the envelope for a long time before finally picking it up. Inside was a 2-page handwritten letter. It was a rambling, self-pitying mess. He wrote about his regret and his mistakes, but it was all couched in the language of a victim. He talked about the pressure of his job, how he lost his way, how he missed the simple life they used to have. He never mentioned Chloe by name, referring to her only as a terrible lapse in judgment. The last paragraph was the real purpose of the letter. "I know I have no right to ask you for anything, Sarah, but seeing what you're building, it reminds me of the dreams we used to share. I'm in a difficult place. A word from you to Julian, or anyone, really, could change everything for me. I just need a second chance to get back on my feet. I'm not asking for a handout, just for a door to be opened. For the man I once was." Sarah put the letter down. A deep sadness washed over her. Not for him, but for the woman she had been. The woman who would have believed this pathetic manipulation. He wasn't sorry for what he did. He was sorry he had been caught and lost everything. He didn't miss her. He missed what she had provided him. That night, she showed the letter to Julian. He read it, his expression unreadable, and handed it back to her. "What do you want to do?" he asked simply. "The old Sarah would have felt guilty," Sarah confessed. "She would have felt responsible. She would have made the call." "And the you that's sitting here now?" Julian prompted gently. Sarah looked around her beautiful, calm home, and then she thought of the towering structure that now stood at the museum. "The Sarah that's sitting here now knows that second chances are earned, not begged for, and that you can't build a new future on a rotten foundation." She knew she couldn't leave him without a response. Silence to a man like Ethan could be misinterpreted as a possibility. She needed to send a final, definitive message. The next day, she went to a storage facility, where a few boxes from her old life remained. She found what she was looking for, a worn, leather-bound sketchbook from her early years of marriage. Its pages were filled with her early, brilliant designs, innovative suburban homes, community centers, a bold proposal for a library cantilevered over a river. These were the dreams she had shared with him, the ones he had condescendingly called her little projects. She didn't write a letter. She simply opened the sketchbook to a detailed drawing of a light-filled public atrium, a design that was a clear predecessor to the central courtyard of the Thorn Wing. At the bottom of the page, in her clear architect's handwriting, she wrote just 7 words. "I was always building. You just couldn't see it." She mailed the sketchbook to his address with no return address. It wasn't an act of revenge, but an act of truth. It was giving him back his own blindness. Weeks later, in his drab, beige apartment, Ethan received the package. He opened it and stared at the sketchbook. He slowly turned the pages, each drawing a testament to a talent he had actively ignored and dismissed. He finally saw her, not as his wife or ex-wife, but as the brilliant woman she had always been. He sank onto his sofa, the sketchbook open on his lap, and for the first time, he didn't feel anger or self-pity. He felt the vast, empty weight of his loss. He hadn't just lost a wife, he had discarded a fortune of another kind, a treasure of talent and spirit that he had been too arrogant and foolish to recognize. And he knew with a certainty that chilled him to the bone that he would spend the rest of his life in the shadow of the world she was building. And that is the story of how one night of calculated arrogance led to a lifetime of karmic justice. It's a powerful reminder that your worth is never determined by who you leave or who leaves you. It's determined by what you build within yourself. Ethan thought he was the prize, but he was only the price Sarah had to pay for her own freedom. Her final triumph wasn't walking in with a billionaire. It was walking in as herself, powerful and whole. We hope you enjoyed this story. If so, please like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss another of our real-life dramas. Thanks for listening.